As we begin to get into this issue, we're glad to be joined by Gidi. He's the former peace negotiator under Prime Minister Barak, also the founder of the Reut Group and a guest of ours from time to time. So thanks for joining. Gidi, I want to say, as clear as it can be, there's growing optimism, perhaps more than we've had here in 2 years of war. Do you share that? What's your take on what's playing out before us right now?
Yes, I think it's obvious that we are in the most optimistic and forward-moving moment since maybe the beginning of the war. I think that what we're seeing here is that a number of steps by the U.S. presidency, by President Trump, really converged the party. So if we were this far from a deal just a week ago, 2 weeks ago, now we're over here. Still, we need some clinching, but we are already over there with very important parameters having been established by President Trump. First and foremost, that there will not be annexation of Israel in the West Bank, meaning the situation in the West Bank is stabilized, which was a major concern. Second, establishing, of course, the parameters that Israel will not have control of any part of Gaza in the long term, which addresses a core demand of Hamas. That, of course, allows for the process of moving in and doing the exchange of the prisoners for the hostages. And of course, there is another element, which is the transition of power of Hamas. We've said it on your shows here on i24News multiple times. There are 4 elements for taking Hamas out of Gaza. The first is military. The military power, there needs to be only one entity that controls arms in Gaza, and that is the governing body of Gaza. Israel says that it will be responsible for the demilitarization of Gaza. I just don't see that happening in the long term. That's a point in which Israel will have to step back. The second point is political. Hamas cannot participate as a party that rejects the existence of Israel in the Palestinian political system. Third, all the social infrastructure of Hamas, healthcare, welfare, education, has to be replaced, again, by the self-governing Palestinian entity. And fourth is the economic element. And here, too, I think that the war has diminished and demolished the economic sources of Hamas, especially when after the war, the humanitarian aid and all the aid and the trade that will flow into Gaza will go through the government. So we are much closer to displacing Hamas than ever before, but still, there is dramatic negotiations to unfold in Cairo.
Look, you touched on something here. Israel's apparent walking away from the specter of annexation in the West Bank, some of the issues that were getting under the skin of our allies in the region, Arab countries. Does this appear to be the real change in what's on the table now, that the region has been brought in by the president now, mounting actual political pressure on Hamas, arguably for the first time?
For sure. I think that what we are seeing is really the emergence of remarkable, perhaps unprecedented, multilateral Arab diplomacy over the last few months, converging under Saudi leadership initially around the French-Saudi initiative for recognition of a Palestinian state. But most people did not pay attention to the accompanying document, which is effectively a sort of a document that has a lot of expectations from the Palestinian side. So there was a convergence around what is expected from the Palestinian side and what is the Arab side willing to do. Then came the attack on the Hamas leadership in Doha, which really was masterfully leveraged by the Qatar leadership for influence in Washington toward ending the deal. Just imagine that they would have played the card of someone who's offended and hurt and break all ties with Israel and with the political process. They did the opposite. They leaned in. I think 24, 36 hours later, their delegate was in Washington, and they then brought forward a meeting of the Arab foreign ministers, which then again brought forward a number of principles that were an essential stepping stone to the Trump plan that we're seeing right now. So we're seeing an Arab diplomacy that effectively, I think for the first time in many years, counterbalancing Israel's influence in Washington. And when we do the final analysis, obviously not today, that will be a major point, how in the last few months, the Arab diplomacy has really been remarkable in terms of advancing their interests toward ending the war.
Now, I want to get your perspective internally on Israel here. If Hamas rejects, what amounts to its own defeat through this deal, does not return the hostages in an orderly manner, is the Israeli political scene set to blame ourselves? Obviously, there's a method here through the Israel Defense Force to oust Hamas from its control, but dealing with the hostages, returning them would be somewhat messier. Is there an internal blame mechanism ready to spring how fragile is this issue within the country here?
Okay, so first of all, I have to acknowledge that if in 2 weeks, I mean, I cannot even imagine the moment, maybe on Simchat Torah, when all these hostages are coming home. That will be incredible. We can retire this pin finally. And all these other things that we have done to bring back the hostages, that I think is a primary goal of the war. I agree it's not the only goal of the war, of course. It's not, but it is a primary goal of the war up there in what we're trying to achieve. The second element is to remove Hamas. That, to me, is the second goal. And over here, as I mentioned, it breaks down into 4 goals. This is a very complicated goal to achieve, and I think in the long term, there'll be a big debate whether the war was managed properly and whether it achieved its goals and who actually succeeded in the war, because Hamas, even if defeated and pushed out of Gaza, they achieved many of their goals, that they had political goals prior to the war. First and foremost, placing the Palestinian issue back at the center of the international agenda. This was one of their primary goals, and they achieved it dramatically. Also, they said all the time, they want Israel out of Gaza. They want a self-governing Palestinian entity in Gaza. All of these things are in the agreement. So the Hamas could claim some achievement, but at the end of the day, I think that for us, the testament is not what happened, of course, after we returned the hostages. There is a dramatic set of challenges about the withdrawal of Israeli forces of Gaza, the introduction of an Arab international force, creating the legal framework, the mandate for that force to operate. I do want to repeat something that I've been saying here over and over again over the last year and a half. The only viable long-term entity for governing Gaza on the Palestinian side is some extension of the Palestinian Authority. Israel's rejection of the Palestinian Authority leads the Arab side and the American side to build these massive workarounds just to compensate for the alternative, which is to take the Palestinian Authority, reform, upgrade it, and invite it to rule Gaza according to the terms of the agreement. So just to go back to your earlier question, we're talking about the final clinching of the deal. I think there are 2 issues here that where President Trump at some point may turn to Israel. Number one is saying to Israel, guys, I heard you, but there is no escape. It will be the Palestinian Authority. Let's upgrade and reform it and make it accessible to you. And number 2, Tony Blair speaks about re-legislating in Gaza, an entire legislative branch that will work effectively top-down and bottom-up, constitutional issues, legislation issues, trade, regular trade. All of these things are implicit. Of course, he doesn't say it explicitly, but he says that presence in Gaza will require legislation. This is, of course, an effort that will take forever, endless resources, impossible to resolve. There is one simple solution, and that is to reapply the Oslo Accords into Gaza. And I think that will be another clinch that will come soon from the Americans to the Israelis saying, hey, everybody has to give something, and those are your 2 big gives, the Palestinian Authority and Oslo Accords in Gaza, which then, by the way, allows dividing Gaza into Area A and B. Remember that Trump suggested dividing Gaza into 2 areas. So Area A and B, and that solves a whole range of other issues that they are now trying to work out. For example, the rules of engagement. According to the Oslo Accords, there are rules of engagement between the Israeli security forces and the Palestinian forces. So that's already there. It's already legislated. The other thing already in existence in the Oslo Accord is a ban on on Hamas from participation in the Palestinian elections. That's also there. Everything relating to trade, movements of goods, services, introduction of international assistance, all of that in the Accords. Yeah. So it's going to be much easier to reapply the Accords to Gaza than to begin to legislate bottom-up and top-down an entire legal system, which will take, effectively, I think, just unfeasible and will not happen.
Certainly a lot of detail prescribed in this deal on the table right now, and you're right, a lot of things to work out. Gidi Greenstein, thanks for being with us so far on this.
Thank you very, very much.